I'm Roger Connors, chairman of 0 to 10, a coaching and leadership training company. Today, we're going to talk about flipping the coaching model on its head, building a coaching culture using self-directed performance coaching. Stay with us.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron, is the founder of FullMontyLeadership.com. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives. Let me ask you, what do you need to do to up-level your leadership? Well, every leader worth their salt has a coach to assist them and keep them on track with being a high-performance individual. But what if there was a way to take coaching and move it throughout your organization? Something that everybody in the organization could actually tap into so they could be at their best. Well, stay tuned because that's what we're going to discuss, self-directed coaching for everyone in your firm. My name is Dov Baron. I am the Dragonist and I'm your host here on the Leadership and Loyalty Show. I'm here to assist you tapping into the one thing in your business that changes everything by transforming meaning into action. You can find out more about me at dovbaron.com. That's DOVBARON.com. And this episode of Leadership and Loyalty is brought to you in part by Magcast. Imagine having your own industry magazine. What would that do for your authority? Well, whether you're a coach, a content expert, or an emerging brand, it's hard to stand out in the crowd. So what if there was a proven way to increase both your perceived authority and your professional status in the eyes of your market and to be able to do it all at once? This is your way to going from being invisible to getting a meeting with anybody you want. To find out more, go to Magcast, that's MAGCAST.co, that's D.co, where first-time publishers are building thriving magazine businesses. And remember, you can chat about this episode or any past episodes inside of our Facebook groups and LinkedIn groups. Just look for the Leadership and Loyalty Podcast. If you're a new listener, new viewer, strap yourself in. We're about to go full Monty. As always, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you tune into podcasts. And we always need your help in staying relevant. So please get over there, rate, review, and subscribe to the show. And if you are a regular listener, a big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners with a potential reach of 2.5 to 4 million listeners for every single show. We're honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. If you're a high-performance individual, you already know the power of having a coach. What do you think would happen if everyone in your organization, from the very top executive to the frontline worker, could not only get a coach, but could be a coach? Well, let's find out together because my guest on this episode is Roger Connors. Now, he is a New York Times and Wall Street Journal best-selling author. He is ranked by the top 30 global gurus as one of the world's top 10 organizational culture professionals for 2018. He's recognized as a thought leader on the topic of organizational and individual performance, bringing over 30 years of extensive expertise in assisting senior management teams all over the world. As a pioneer in the performance improvement space, Roger has developed the #1 award-winning content that has been published in interviews extensively, including the fact that he has co-authored best-selling books, The Oz Principle, Change the Culture, Change the Game, How Did That Happen, Journey to Emerald City, The Wizard of Oz, and Fix It. In addition to that, he was a featured speaker at the Executive Office of the President of the United States in Washington, D.C. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and help me to welcome 4 times New York Times and Wall Street Journal best-selling author, then ranked in the top 10 cultural gurus, and author of a brand new book called Get a Coach, Be a Coach, Mr. Roger Connors. Welcome, sir.
Thanks so much, Doug. Great to be with you.
It's good to have you here, mate. It's took a while, but we're here. I'm glad to have you. So where we always like to start the show is by asking, you're an influential guy. People look to you for influence and potentially for guidance. So who is someone who we might not consider, or somebody we might not have even known, who's been a major influence on you and on your leadership?
Well, that's a great question. I hadn't thought about that, but just my initial reaction would be Ron Dollins. He was a CEO at a company, a smaller company, initially in my consulting career, Advanced Cardiovascular Systems. And then he became the CEO of Guidant, which was all of the medical device companies from Eli Lilly combined together in one organization. And I got to say that I was his consultant. I was working for him as a client to help with culture change. But I've never seen a more profound leader than in Ron Dollins. It was truly an impactful experience.
So tell us a little bit about that. Tell us what you specifically got there, because, it's often, like I said, it's often these people that we don't think of. We think of the high profile names, and oftentimes it's somebody who is, impactful and powerful, but most of us don't know them. And we don't know the specific of, like, what was the nugget or nuggets?
Yeah, it's interesting because as I think about Ron, he was very effective, but people liked him. And I say but because that's usually how that is. It's one or the other, right? And in this case, Ron got stuff done. He was effective as a CEO in making things happen. And people in his organization actually loved him and loved the culture he created.
So what do you think is the nugget you took away for yourself about how to lead from him?
I think really leading on merit and being fair about it. People tend to respond well when they think they're being treated fairly. It's when they see the contradictions. I often talk to leaders about managing the contradictions. When you're working on creating a culture, you get fairly explicit about what you want to see people doing. All of a sudden the bar raises and everyone gets measured immediately by this new standard of behavior that you've now declared you want to be. And more open, more candid, more forthright with people. And in this particular case, that gap, that contradiction can be what works against you when you're initially working on culture change. And in Ron's case, he was totally fair, worked by the merits, had very few contradictions. So I think it's that it's really having a fair standard and being consistent with it.
Yeah, that's I think that's a very challenging thing for any leader, because one of the things I talk about is paying attention to where you need to where you have a bias that you're unaware of.
Yeah,
and that's a very good point that you bring up there, because it's we all have our blind spots. So that's a really cool thing. Now, your new book is Get a Coach, Be a Coach. Now, let's put things in perspective here, because traditionally a professional coach is in charge of learning experiences and accountability. And you talk about turning that model on its head. Can you tell us a little bit about turning the model on its head?
Yeah, so good question. I first of all, you start with the premise that you believe coaching is effective, right? Mm-hmm. So it's this idea that, look, if you add coaching to the performance equation, coaching done correctly, people do better. They accelerate. Many studies have shown almost 100% increase in productivity and a 6-time return on ROI when coaching's done effectively. Mm-hmm. You start there and you say, okay, so if it's that good, why doesn't everybody have it? Like, why aren't we doing that for everyone? Of course, it's expensive. You can't hire an executive coach for everyone in the organization. What blows your mind is when you really do the research, you find out that the average person has what we call 10 coach-ready skills. Meaning, if I sat down with you, Dob, and said, okay, let's have you list your skills. First of all, people hate doing that. It's hard. You wouldn't think it's hard, but it is. Yeah. People sit down, they get through maybe 10, and they kind of hit a stopping point. They go, okay, I've got 10. And then I sit down and say, okay, well, let's keep going. Keep going on skills. For example, doing a webinar. Putting on a webinar, we listed the skills for that, and it was like we stopped at 30, right? There are different things you had to be able to do well.
Right.
You're expert at this. You would list a lot of these. So you get to that point where you kind of pause, and then I facilitate and say, now keep going, keep listing skills. People get to 60 or 70 skills that they have in their ability to do things. Then I say, now let's identify the coach ready skills. So coach ready skills, I'm able and I'm willing. So I feel sufficiently competent to coach someone on it. And I want to, like, I'm interested in the topic.
Mm-hmm.
So generally people have about 10 of those. So imagine
Wow.
if you have an organization of 1,000 people,
Yeah.
they each have 10 coach ready skills. That's 10,000 coaches that are sitting in your organization, capable, able, effective at what they do. The question is, have you unleashed that? Like, what are you doing to unleash that capability in the organization so they can help each other? And that's the idea of self-directed performance coaching, is giving everyone a chance in the organization to serve as coaches and also receive coaching from others around them.
So that brings up the obvious question. The obvious question is, if you've been coached, and my guess is that most of our listeners have been coached in some way, shape, or form, there's a pretty good chance you've been coached by a bad coach.
Yeah.
Because, if you've been to a doctor, you've likely been to a bad doctor. It doesn't mean all doctors are bad. If you've been coached, you've probably been coached by somebody who's bad, and it doesn't mean all coaches are bad. However, this is, you're not advocating that everybody goes and signs up and does a coaching program, right?
Right.
So, and gets certification, because every man and his dog is already a coach and every woman and a cat is a coach. So, okay. So how do we make sure that this model, where people are, got 10 coach ready skills, that they actually could be effective?
Yeah, so there is such a thing as bad coaching, and like you said, we've all experienced
We've
that.
noticed that.
I remember when I was so when I was a young man, soccer wasn't the big sport. It was baseball. It was Little League baseball in the U.S. And so I was on a Little League baseball team, and my coach, one of the assistant coaches, could tell that I was afraid of the ball. Like when it would bounce towards me, fielding grounders, I would kind of move back a bit. So he took me to the side away from the rest of the team, and he'd never done this with anyone before. And he put me in a soccer goalie cage, where it's kind of a shorter kind of area. Yeah. I'm like, well, what do you want me to do? And he says, just stand there. And then he walked back about, 50 yards or something. And he started hitting grounders into me. So I couldn't get out of the cage. Like I had to stay there and actually either get hit or field the grounder. And I'm like, it was perfect. After about 3 weeks of doing that, my fear of, taking grounders went away. And this coach was so effective at doing what he did. It was such a simple thing, but it was so effective. So, of course there's bad coaches out there, but there's also really good coaches out there. And what we often think of when we want to coach is like, if I'm playing golf, I want Tiger Woods to be my coach. I want a 10. And, we have this thing called the skills index, and it goes from 0 to 10. 10's a master.
Yes.
And people say, well, I want a 10 to really coach me. And what research has actually shown is that recency is more effective than expertise at helping people take the next step. Meaning if I'm a 4 in golf, my best coach is going to be a 5 or a 6. It's not going to be a 10. In fact, if I were to get Tiger Woods to try to come coach me in golfing right now, he would be really disappointed. He wouldn't even know where to start. I'm so bad, right? But someone who had just been through it serves as a better coach. So look, you're surrounded by people in your organization that have done what you want to do. And the question is, can you tap into that and get the coaching from them? And all you need is a 4 or a 5 to help you get to the next step if you're a 3 or a 4. So the coaching pool increases dramatically. You don't have to have a master, the best coach in the world at doing something. You just need someone who's been there, just done it, and can share that knowledge with you to help you take the next step.
So again, I'm going to just push back a little bit here, because I want people to grasp what this means. Because on one side of it is, as I said, some people are bad coaches. Yeah, you're a 5, but you're awful at teaching.
Yeah.
So for instance, my wife sees something in a software program and she teaches herself, and she's amazing, amazing. And then I say, well, you did that so great. Can you help me? And she goes, yeah, just do this, just do this. And I'm like, oh my God, like I have no idea what the hell you just did. Right. So, because there's different learning styles. And my learning style is to sit down and have you tell me where to put my fingers. So I'm getting the experience of it, and it's tactile. I'm visual tactile. I need both. Whereas so we tend to teach in the style we have. And that's another part of the problem with coaching, is that oftentimes people say, well, just do this. Well, I just told you. Well, there's something called repetition and some, so I'm really looking at this hump, because again, even when I meet coaches who are, quote, certified coaches, oftentimes they don't understand that part. So how do you propose we get over that in this peer coaching?
So we suggest we flip the accountability model, and instead of putting the coach in charge, we call it the learner or the coachee, right?
Yes.
So the learner now takes accountability for getting what they want. So you don't have to be a good coach anymore because I'm a good learner. In fact, we often tell people we don't certify coaches, we certify learners. We teach them how to get the coaching they need. So one strategy, we actually call it the high five strategies. And we make it really simple. We say, look, you pick one of these when you're sitting down with a coach. You ask them 3 questions. We call it top 3 questions. So it's top 3 questions: modeling, practice perfect, game film, and get input. We say use one of those. You deploy one of those strategies. So, Dov, if I were sitting down with you and said, how do you become a top podcaster in the world? I mean, it's amazing what you've accomplished there. How do you do that? You're only going to give me 15 minutes maybe. So as a learner, I'm going to take control of the situation. I'm going to say, I have 3 questions for you about how we do that. Question 1, 2, and 3. I'd like to get through those in the next 20 minutes. So now I'm taking accountability for getting the coaching I need, rather than putting on your shoulders to dispense the knowledge you think I need.
And that's why I wanted to bring that up, because I think that's a really important point. Many years ago, I was contacted by somebody who I had met briefly, and she said to me, I really want to be a speaker. Would you be willing to give me a little bit of time to help me? And I said, absolutely. Because most of the people I know are successful are generous. She says, oh, that's great. So we had this 20 minutes booked, and then she shows up and she says, I want to be a speaker. So what's your best advice? And I said, take a shower. And she said, what, really? I said, yeah, it gets hot up there and you don't want to get up there stinky. And she goes, oh, okay. So she starts to smile and says, okay, what else? And I said, wear deodorant because it gets hot on stage. And she's like, oh, come on, why are you being a goof? I said, I'm not being a goof. She goes, what do you mean? I said, my responsibility is to help you. Your responsibility is to know what you need help with. That's not my job. That's yours. Right. I'm willing to give you my time, but you've got to be willing to show up. And so it's that same model, right? It's like, right. And that's why even in our initial conversation, that was what I liked about this, that I think that people have got to get, because actually I would like to take it further and say, whether you have a professional coach that you're paying 10 grand a month to, or whether you're being peer coached by somebody you sit next to in the office, hold on a second. The responsibility is on you, as opposed to, you didn't coach me very well. Well, that's not true. Did you show up knowing what it is you wanted? Were you specific? Did you hold yourself accountable to that? And people don't. So how do we get the people to hold themselves accountable to that?
Well, part of it's about, what am I trying to accomplish? What's motivating me, right?
Right.
So why would I want to get a coach in the first place, and then get the information I need? So we have this model through the research we've done, we call it the coaching triggers. There's 5.
Yes.
And anytime one of these conditions presents itself, you should be thinking coach. Like, for example, this is an obvious one, but if you're doing something for the first time, you should be getting a coach. Like, why aren't you getting a coach? Are you going to waste the company's time, money, energy, and resources by relearning all of this all over again, reinventing the wheel? Or are you going to speed it up by reaching out to get a coach? Another one's when you're stuck in some important thing you're trying to accomplish. You should reach for a coach. Trying to do something strategic, want to accelerate performance, or you want to crush it. Those are the 5 conditions. Anytime you face one of these, you should be thinking coach. And the benefit is I'm motivated, because this is all stuff in my daily work. We're not talking about, developmental things that may or may not have applicability in my job. We're talking about, look, when you're in your work, whatever it is, if I'm managing a matrix team for the very first time, that's a good time to reach out and get a coach and get coached up on what you need to learn. And by the way, what we suggest, there's really 3 types of engagements you can have when you get a coach. One's called to pick your brain. It's 15 minutes, quick, really fast. Other one's type 2 is get some coaching, maybe a lunchtime experience in a post-COVID world, right? I mean, right now it's a Zoom lunch. And type 3 is that longer kind of repeated coaching experience that we generally think of when we think of coaching. All of our research has shown that 85% of the coaching that's done is type 1 or 2. It's fast and it's quick. What that means is you could have multiple coaches, and you should have. That also helps ferret out the bad coaching. We had one HR leader come to us and she said, well, and we implemented this in a 40,000 person organization.
Wow.
And she said, this is great, but I had someone come the other day, it was horrible coaching. It was their thing they're getting coaching on. We call it the MIT, the most important thing they need coaching on was time management. So they went and met with someone and the person said, well, just stop working 5 days a week. Just do it all in 4. You'll get it all done. You'll have an extra day. And she's like, you got to be kidding me. It blew my mind. We can't have everyone working 4 days a week in this organization. How do we stop this bad coaching? And we said, well, the key is people reaching out to get multiple coaches so they can kind of test the coaching they're getting from someone on someone else and, use common sense, the common sense rule as you're hearing this coaching, right? So the idea is, look, they get motivated to get coaching when they're using these 5 coaching conditions. If you're stuck and your boss is saying, where's this result? Or the leader of the organization saying, look, we got to get moving and we're not, then reach out and get some coaching. It'll move you off a dime.
So there's a couple of challenges with that. One is ego.
Yeah.
That people will often not ask for a coach, not ask for assistance because they're embarrassed. Their ego is in the way. They don't want to look foolish. We know, in the work that I do and the work that you do, you've no doubt experienced the same thing. I mean, I work with incredibly successful individuals, and it's very often one of the challenges I meet is that, well, I should know this. And my response is, well, why should you? Mm-hmm. Well, I'm the CEO. I understand that, but why should you know this? Well, I should be. If I'm being paid all this money, I should already know this. Well, if you have never lived in Japan and you've never met a Japanese person and you give yourself a hard time for not speaking Japanese, it doesn't make much sense to me, does it to you? No, but other people will know. And so it's that ego thing. Yeah. How do you guide people around that, Roger, when they're facing that? Because that's an incredibly powerful force, the force not to look like a fool.
Yeah, and I would add to that, it's the ego side's one side. The other side is what we call knowledge hoarding. And it's how you get ahead in life, right? You know more than somebody else. So why would I share what I know with others? Because I may be giving away my opportunity to stand out, be differentiated.
Exactly.
So it's a culture problem. It can't be a coaching problem, right? I mean, if you're solving a coaching problem, you deal with all those issues. But if you identify it as a culture problem, building a coaching culture, now you're defining beliefs that you want people to hold about how we work around here. Like you know how culture's transmitted. Someone new comes into the job and they say they go see one of the people they've met recently, and they say, well, we go to lunch, and they say, well, how do things really work around here? That's where culture's transmitted.
Absolutely.
When they lean over and say, well, don't ever say what you think in a meeting, like do it outside of the meeting, but don't ever say it in the meeting, and they hear that 2 times in a row, you're toast. They're part of the culture.
Yep.
And so what we have to do is define a coaching culture as being a culture where, look, we expect you to raise your hand when you're stuck. Like, don't stop and waste time and resources. Raise your hand. We expect you to volunteer. You need help. And we have some great stories we tell about that. We call them coaching call-outs. When someone said, look, I need some help on this, team jumps in, and we're able to move forward as an organization and accomplish some difficult thing. So it's changing the culture about being willing to share and be vulnerable, right? Be willing to admit, I may not be able to do something. That's a cultural issue. It's important to address it that way.
But I think it's really important that you brought up those 2 sides of it. One is the ego of I don't want to look foolish, and the other is the ego of I want to hoard the knowledge and give myself a better chance of reaching that next level. But I agree with you fully. It's a cultural issue that we've got to address. Now, one of the things you were saying there was that when looking for coaching, one has to determine their MIT, their most important thing, as you talk about it in the book, their MIT. And when you talk about that, very often a person is dealing with more than one.
Mm-hmm.
So and it can get confusing if I've got two or three coaches on one and two or three coaches on another. How would you recommend in this situation? Because Charlie might sit down with me, a coworker, and say, "No, this is my MIT," and then come back tomorrow and go, "This is my MIT," and it's a different one.
Yeah.
So, what's the guidance around that in getting people moving around those things?
So we look pretty hard at that because getting that right's important, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
getting everyone pointed in the right direction. So we in one of our organizations, we took a high performing team of 20 people. These were, it was considered an all-star team. Like, these are folks who get stuff done. And we had them identify in the coaching triggers those 5 things: stuck, first time, accelerate, strategic, crush it. Said, how many of those are you dealing with? Listen to this. On a team of just 20 high performing individuals, there were 23 things they were stuck on. I'm just looking at my notes. 30 things they're doing for the first time. 37 they had to accelerate. 31 they needed to crush, and 49 that were strategic.
Oh my goodness.
In a team of just 20 people.
Wow.
So what we're talking about is real stuff. I mean, these people are dealing real stuff here. And so how do you get down to 2 or 3, right? So
Exactly.
we have them run it through the urgency filter and say, look, you can't work on everything at one time, but pick the most important things you need coaching on based on the urgency filter. That could be, I'm getting a call every day on it. There's high dependency in a collaborative environment for this to get done. Whatever those might be, a deadline coming up quickly. And those 2 or 3 things are your most important things you need coaching on. Of course, with this complexity, so we have a software product, and I don't know how a company could do this without figuring out some way to go online to kind of make this efficient, right? Because it'd be pretty difficult to do without that. But so it becomes important to understand that this can be complex in as much as people have a lot of things they could reach out to get coaching on.
So I know that you have run very successful organizations, and you have moved from one to another and done all kinds of things. Who was your first coach?
Professionally?
Yeah, because you told us about the baseball coach when you were a kid, or softball, but professionally.
I would have to say it was Larry Childress. So it was in my first consulting firm that I went into. And I had my first 2 projects. This is interesting. And you got to be almost a baby boomer probably to appreciate this. But
I'll be okay.
you remember, that's right. So you remember the high yield bonds, right? The junk bonds. Yeah. And Mike Bilkin was the king of the junk bonds. And he had an LA office. And he was actually it was right when he was taken out because of the investigation that was going on.
Yep.
And John Kissick became the person running that division. And so one of my first consulting jobs was to go into that environment and take all these guys who are making millions of bucks each and figure out how to reorganize with Michael Milken out. Then my second project was on the other side of the nation with 3 Mile Island, and it was right after the nuclear accident at 3 Mile Island. So I had kind of like these first 2, pretty meaty, amazing coaching experience or culture experiences. And John was a great coach to me. He was someone who would watch me do something wrong and let me have the freedom to do it. I mean, there were boundaries. And then he'd coach me up, and it was a great way for me to learn. The way I learned, the best kind of coach is someone who allows you to learn the way you learn.
Yes.
And that's why we think the learner should take charge of the coaching experience, because they know how best they learn. For me, it's didactic. I just need to ask 100 questions. Like, don't sit down and tell me a bunch of stuff up front. Tell me enough to get started. Let me get going and ask a bunch of questions about it. That's how I learn. And he was terrific at letting me do that.
Yeah, I think that is such, like I said earlier, I think that's such a key point, is to know, and I don't think most people do know, by the way. I don't think a lot of people do know how they best learn, but to be responsible for your learning means you actually then have to say, hold on a minute, I've been asking all these questions, but nothing's sticking. Or, whatever it is for you, is to know that about yourself. And again, I think common knowledge is extraordinarily rare. So we think that something should be common knowledge, and it's not. And instead, if you go to what subjectively works for you, you're going to just have a lot more success. And I really like that about what you're saying. What was, like, one of the things I love about the idea of coaching is particularly in the context of what you're talking about in these 5 triggers, is the willingness to recognize I am stuck, the willingness to recognize I'm blocked in some way. What was one of the things that you did for a long time that actually blocked you from your success?
Probably not leaning into the writing side of what I do. You know, in my business, it's thought leadership, right? So doing a lot of work with clients, you know, really facilitating movement in one-on-one meetings and facilitated meetings. But it was the writing piece that really changed the game for me in my career. So it was finding the right coach to do that. And it was actually the first person I wrote with, who was a kind of an editor, a heavy editor, I guess you'd call it. Mm-hmm. And I remember the first piece that went to him, it came back, it was just torn up. I mean, and I just called him. I was actually a little upset about it. I'm like, sure. Look, I know what I'm talking about here. He says, yeah, but you're not saying it very well. And it really refined that ability to create that messaging in the written form. So that was a great place for me to get a coach and really get coached up.
So that's a great example, because it was something that I think it's a great example because it's something that you thought you were, you know, I know the stuff.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm going to be good at this. And yes, there was probably no doubt that you were very good at the knowledge, but the transference of that knowledge and the way to transfer it. I mean, like, so for me, that's a great example of you can be really smart at something and still need coaching in the accessibility of it to another or to others.
Yeah, one of the mistakes I think executives make a lot when it comes to coaching is they rely on 1 or 2 key executive coaches, right? So there's a place for that. So I'm not suggesting that shouldn't be the case. There's a terrific place for that. But the kind of coaching that I'm talking about, it's on demand, bite-sized, real-time, and skill specific. Mm-hmm. It's not about your career. It's about getting stuff done that you haven't done before or that you're stuck on. So I would think a typical executive ought to have lots of coaches that I'm talking about. And these can be the pick your brain coaches, but they're reaching out all the time for coaching. It's more of a core competency than it is a program or process, right?
Right.
It's thinking when I'm in a situation where I've hit one of the coaching conditions, or I'm in a situation where I could be benefited from some outside knowledge, reach out, get the coaching you need to help you take that next step.
Yeah, and as I said, I'm an advocate of it. I speak about it, I write about it, but this whole thing about you are responsible. It's not on the coach, you know, and I paid $1 million for a coach. Okay, so what?
Yeah.
You're responsible for that. You have to make that work. And I love that you're calling that out, because then it's not about certified coaching or non-certified coaching. It's about, are you saying you want help or do you want help?
Right.
Because those are different.
You know, I had to laugh when I approached my publisher, Ingrid Zackheim, who's the president of Penguin Random House Books, about this idea. About 3 minutes into the conversation, he said, "Roger, stop." I thought, uh-oh, he's a New Yorker, so I'm going to get it now. And, straight talker. And he said, "I hate mentoring." And I'm like, "What?" He says, "Yeah, I hate mentoring." He says, we assign mentors here, and they come and meet with me, and they don't really want to be here, and I'm not sure why we're here. He said, "Look, if I could just coach, like bite size, like just when it's needed, I could get 20 people in the time that I'm doing one." He says, "I'm all in on that." So what we usually find is that a lot of organizations are using mentoring to solve a coaching problem, and that's where they get frustrated, because there's certainly a place for mentoring, and that mentoring has to be in place in organizations to really develop an organization effectively.
Yes.
But when you try to use mentors to do bite-sized, on-time, real-time, on-demand, skill-based coaching, it just doesn't work.
Right.
So the right combination is, a coaching culture where people are self-directed in the coaching and reaching out as they need it, layered over with executive coaching where it can be strategically implemented with an effective mentoring approach. And now you have a system of development that's pretty sharp.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's really cool. I love that where you're doing that. What is You know, I've always said that we are in many ways formed by our environment for sure, but also by what happens to us. What was a turning point in your life, in your leadership, even in your philosophy as a human being that, you might have been going down this road and then you suddenly went, sharp right, sharp left, whatever it was. Was there something there for you? Can you think of something that sort of redirected you?
Yeah, kind of. This may sound uh, hard to believe, but I think I was probably 10.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad was a middle manager in an insurance company. So just
Okay.
imagine, what, 10, what was that, 50 years ago? 50 years ago, middle manager in an insurance company. And he would come home at night. We'd all sit at the dinner table. We had this bar. We'd all sit there as the three kids and my mom and dad. And my dad would just vent every night.
Mm,
How bad his boss was, how
right.
bad the team was, how bad the environment was. And I heard this night after night after night. And I love my dad. He was awesome, awesome man and very good at what he did. But he was trapped in this organizational culture and situation that was horrible. And that stayed with me my entire life. I'm sure it's shaped a bit, my thinking about, hey, I want to fix that. Like,
Yeah.
that's something I want to make better because I saw how it impacted, a person and their family. So that was a turning point for me, really.
And again, I think that's such a really cool thing to recognize because I'm a great believer in that we are formed mostly by our pain, not by our pleasure, but by our
Mm.
pain. And if you're a decent human being, there's probably a good chance that there is a pain you want to ease in the world that you either experience directly or indirectly.
Yeah.
And you go, okay, and it becomes a determining factor. And that's a great example of that. And talking of great examples, who has done a great job? I mean, I know you work with a lot of companies and a lot of organizations. Who has done a great job of what you're talking about in this book, Get a Coach, Be a Coach?
Well, there's actually a lot of large organizations that are leaning in this
Mm-hmm.
regard. But if I can break it down to the individual level real quick, I'm an adjunct professor. I teach a MBA class also. And I had this group of professional MBAs. There were 13 of them. And I had a police lieutenant, I had a construction supervisor. They were all getting their MBAs to try to just better their lives and move forward,
Sure.
right? So I introduced this coaching model to him and say, look, what's something you want to get coaching on that's important for you to succeed? So at the beginning of the semester, they all identified this one thing. And within about 2 months, 6 of the 13 received promotions in their jobs. No
Wow.
kidding. No kidding. And they would all say it's because of the coaching process. Now, in some cases, it was knowledge they learned. In other cases, reaching out to getting coaches also created opportunities for them to get connected. And people were impressed with the questions they were asking and the things that they were working on. But what has amazed me is to watch how effective it can be to get a little bit of help when you need it and what it can do for your career. It was truly inspiring. But there are organizations that I think have reached out in ways that are profound, and I think without naming too many specifically, Amazon is one where there have been pieces of Amazon where they've actually created a coaching network where
Mm,
you can do this. Like, people reach out to their peers to get specific coaching about things that they need. They've scaled it effectively, been very, very successful with it.
that's very interesting. Really is.
One other quick example, if I could. I was working on my house, so I did a remodel of my home, and but that's kind of a hobby of mine. I love to work on that kind of thing. And as I was working on it, there was some trim work we were doing, and I noticed it. I walked in one day, and the baseboard was kind of going like that. It was an S shape, and I'm like, okay, that's not right. So I talked to a contractor. And I said, I don't think that's right. Do you think that's right? He said, no, it's not. That's not right. He said, well, I said, so what's going on here? He said, well, the finishers came in and they put the baseboard in, but the wall was crooked. And so they blamed the drywallers. And the
Mm,
drywallers who came in said, well, that ain't our fault. The guys who did the framing, They're the ones that made the crooked wall. And the framers said, hey, they gave us crooked wood. I mean, it wasn't straight to begin with. So what are we supposed to do? And I had to laugh about it. And I was telling my friend the story, who works on the same kind of things. He did a remodel recently too. He said, Roger, you should have just asked me. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, here's what I do. And I've done this quite a few homes. So what I do is every night after the framers are done, I go in and I take a string line and I run a string line with the level and I make sure the wall's straight. And if it's not straight, they fix it the next morning. I never have those problems. I'm like, oh, geez. Why didn't I ask him? He lives 2 doors away.
Right.
It cost me a lot of money and time to fix that problem. I should have reached out and gotten that coaching.
But that is, I love that example because it's such a solid example of anything.
Yeah.
Right. So this is not about, oh, how can I be a better leader, which is of course important, but it's like the things you leave, and I say this to leaders all the time, the things you're ignoring are going to cost you a lot more later. It's better to pay up front for the things that are, I don't want to pay that. Well, the accumulative cost of now having to tear down a freaking wall, make sure the wood is straight, put new framers in, put new drywallers in, new finishes in, all that is a massive job that could have been solved at a very simple level if we got out of our own way and said, well, what do I need help with? And I love that as a simple example because it is that. It's simple, it's practical, and we can all go, oh yeah, okay. Because we've all done it. We all know that, I just did a video that went out last week and it was about hindsight is 2020.
Yeah.
And how interesting that as we record this, it's 2020. And we're not having a lot of hindsight. We're not really looking at what we could learn. And we're about to say, put me back in normal. Well, normal's over. So it's a really great example of that.
And once you've created a coaching culture, when you start down this road, you immediately start thinking, how do I make it efficient?
Yes.
Like, how do I connect? How do I match people? How do I identify skills? All that kind of stuff goes on. I think it was, I forget the organization, was it Workday, that identified 55,000 skills in their inventory, that massive amount of inventory of skills. It's interesting because, the idea is the more efficiently I can create a culture where I match people, the more effective it is.
Yes.
And the better hits I get. Like if I come to you and say, I don't, Dob, do you play the guitar? You probably play the guitar, don't you?
I don't.
Okay, so
I have a music freak, but I don't play.
I play the guitar, and I'm working on the lead line for Layla from Eric Clapton, right?
Oh, fantastic song.
So the most efficient coaching culture would actually match me with someone who plays the lead line for Layla, Eric Clapton song, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a part of a leader's opportunity is to try to help create a culture, not only create a coaching culture where people are willing to say they need help, willing to offer it, but then to create a culture that is efficient at creating those matches so that we speed up the ability of an organization to get the right people talking to the right people to get stuff done when it needs to get done.
Yeah. We're getting close to the end of the show, and I want to ask you, I want to make sure people can find out more about you and all your resources. I want to sort of finish with a practical go do this. But before I do that, I have to get to the most important question, because as I look at you over what would be your right shoulder, I see a very important thing, which is R2-D2. And what I know is that you have a Millennium Falcon in your home. Tell us more, because I am a Star Wars geek too.
Yeah. So the Millennium Falcon landed in London in our basement. And so we have a little playroom, and I hired a set designer. He did the suit for the Iron Man 2 movie, actually built it himself, created it. And so between movies, he's, doing theme rooms. And so he came down and he created a Millennium Falcon, a 3-level Millennium Falcon in our basement playroom. And it is awesome. We have the cockpit, we have a TV screen behind it, so you can it looks like you're in space. It's got all the instrumentation. You can click buttons. And the grandkids, I have 8 grandkids. that absolutely adore it. It's just,
Oh my God, you are breeding Star Wars nerds. That is fantastic.
yeah, it's cool.
Oh, I have got like so many of my friends are Star Wars nerds.
Yeah, yeah.
We're all geeks. We're all into it. One of my friends is actually a best-selling children's author, and he's a Star Wars. I mean, like you can name a bizarre character, and he's like, oh yeah, and it's got backstory and everything. Like he knows all of them. And they have in Christmas time, they don't have a Christmas tree. They have a Yoda tree with little Yodas. I mean, it's full on.
That's cool.
And so if he was to come to your house, I think it would be, to use a term, a wet dream for him. It's just like, oh my God. So the guy came in and built you 3-level?
Yeah, he's got the chess set,
Yeah.
and just it looks just exactly like it. I mean, it's incredible, and he's using like some of the fittings. He's using like sprinkler fittings, to be the pipes and things, and it's just so well done. Just so impressed with it.
And you gotta, I mean, for me, I look, because I'm an artist first. When I look at those things, I'm always like, I'm in awe of how you took something that I only see in this frame,
yeah,
in this mentality, and you put it in a different context, and it's suddenly something else altogether. That's
he
so
has
cool.
hubcaps as vents for the engines, and it looks like vents for an engine. It's pretty.
That's so cool. Well, thank you for sharing that with us. That's some cool stuff. So if you were going to give someone a piece of practical advice so they go away from here and go, yeah, I got to do that. I want to put that, I want to take action now. What would be the thing you would ask them to do in the next, say, 24 hours?
Think of something that you could benefit from coaching on, a most important thing. So something you're working on in your work today, you're stuck, first time, want to accelerate, whatever. Identify it. Mm-hmm. Identify 5 people that either know how to do it or may know how to do it or know someone that does know how to do it. So those 3, right? Someone that knows how to do it, may know how to do it, or could connect you with someone that knows how to do it. Yeah. And just text them. Text those 5 people and say, look, this is what I'm working on. What do you think? Could I pick your brain for 15 minutes? You'll be amazed at the impact that'll have for you.
Yeah, it's so simple and so profound. Thank you for that. I really appreciate it. I would love for you to tell our audience where they can learn more about you and all the wonderful resources that you have. And I know, like I said, you've got multiple books and tons of resources. So please tell everybody where they can find out more about you.
Well, thanks for asking that. So I'm on LinkedIn, Roger Connors, so I'd love to connect with you. And then our website is 0to10.com, and you can find a lot of information there. So we reach out either way, and we our book was planned to come out in August, but because of circumstances, that's been moved to January. But we have advanced copies, so if someone contacted me, I could get advanced copy to them, no problem.
Okay, and 0 to 10 is written out.
Yes, zerototen.com.
0to10.com. Fantastic. Roger, it's been a pleasure, my friend. It's been an honor. Thank you. I've really enjoyed our conversation. And I salute you. And I love that you are turning the coaching model on its head and making the coachee responsible. I love that. I want to thank you again. Appreciate you being with us. And I hope you'll stay with us to the end.
Thanks so much.
My pleasure. And for you, dear listener, remember you can hang out with other conscious leaders, chat about this episode or any past episodes inside of our Facebook or LinkedIn groups. Simply look for the Leadership and Loyalty Podcast. See, it doesn't matter how successful you are. If your employees and your customers don't understand what gives your company meaning, you're only working at a fraction of your capability. To find out more about it, you can hire me, Dov Barron, as a speaker or leadership strategist for yourself or your organization. Simply go to dovbaron.com. That's DOVBARON.com. Because unified meaning, or as we call it, finding your dragonfire, is the one single monolithic difference between mediocrity and greatness for all individuals and for companies. I want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about how you are surrounded by people who can help you, who are willing to coach you if you would just ask. And you're also surrounded by so many people that you have enough skills that you're coach ready to help them with. I'm Dov Barron. I'm here to assist you tapping into your dragonfire to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, in your life, and in your leadership impact. And I am out.